All right, we are going to dive into this. Thank you guys for attending the 2025 recap from VeeamOn. We're very excited to be talking about some key learnings and some really great insights that were learned in VeeamOn. So VeeamOn was April 21st through the 23rd in the great state of California and San Diego. And so we were very excited to talk about some upcoming Veeam announcements, things that you should know. And also some insights from their 2025 ransomware trends report. And so as we go through the presentation, a lot of the key headlines, a lot of the key facts that you need to know from that event will be discussed. And so with that, I'm very excited to introduce our speakers today. First up is Dustin. Dustin is a systems engineer here at VeeamOn, and he's been working in IT since 2024. He's certified with Veeam as an engineer and also certified as a Veeam architect. He has over 15 years of experience in data protection and disaster recovery. And with that, he's been lead architect for Veeam deployments across small and medium-sized businesses and large-scale environments. He has experience with VMware, Hyper-V, and cloud environments. Very excited to hear Dustin recap on today's discussion. And then next will be Brent. Brent is the Chief Technology Officer here at VeeamOn. He's been consulting in information technology for over 18 years. He has utilized Veeam since Veeam Backup 2.0 back in 2008. He's also a certified engineer with Veeam and a certified architect. And he's been supporting VMware since 2006 and Hyper-V since 2008. So both Brent and Dustin are very experienced, very knowledgeable about Veeam. Both attended VeeamOn and will be sharing some great insights as we move forward. So thank you, Brent, and thank you, Dustin, for discussing this today. With that, I'm going to turn over to Dustin to go through our agenda and walk through the key insights.
All right, so in today's agenda, we are going to be going over some of the insights from Veeam's annual ransomware trends report this year. Every year that has a lot of good info that Veeam has seen throughout the year, so we're going to be covering their trend report from this last year. We are also going to be covering the new Entra ID backup. This is something that Veeam has very much been getting into since Microsoft doesn't want to do a very good job at it. We will be covering migrating away from VMware to Hyper-V or other platforms with Veeam. We all know that VMware has been kind of hurting a lot of people lately, so we're going to cover some of those aspects. The new Veeam hardened repo has a lot of changes to it, so we want to cover all of those changes. And then we're going to be covering a majority of this on Veeam 13. There's been a lot of changes at 13 that's come along, including the new UI, the Linux appliance, high availability, a lot more features. So we're going to cover all of those new features that are coming out with Veeam 13.
All right. I'm going to start out talking about some of the ransomware trends. So every year Veeam does this report. This year it was 1,300 organizations, 900 of who experienced an attack. And experienced an attack doesn't mean it was necessarily successful. It just means that somebody tried. So of the 1,300, the 900 makes 69%, which is a staggering percentage of people who got attacked from ransomware. Out of those, 89% went for backups and 34% were successful. So this is part of the reason that there's so many different security things being introduced in Veeam is backups have become a key target because early on ransomware orgs realized that if they get the backups, then people have to pay the ransom. Whereas if they don't get the backups, then people can just go ahead and restore and not have to pay it. For the people who did pay the ransom, 69% were attacked again. So essentially there's no difference on whether you've paid the ransom or not. It's probably about like a marketing mailing list where they just sell it to some other ransom company and they say, well, we didn't do it again. The dwell time has been dropping drastically. If you remember a few years ago when we would talk about this, it'd be like, oh, the attackers might be in your environment for a week, a month before they do anything. Well, now that's down to less than 24 hours often. And a lot of that's because more and more companies have SIMs, good EDRs, MDRs, and things that will notice things happening. So they're getting in quick now and either exfiltrating data or encrypting stuff very quickly, as opposed to hanging around for a long time and possibly being detected. Data exfiltration has been growing, so more and more people are exfiltrating data. And what that means is that even if you can restore your stuff and you don't have to pay the ransom because of loss, you might still have to pay it so that they don't post stuff on the dark web. This is a lot of stuff when you're doing forensics afterwards. A lot of the work is to figure out what might have been taken to figure out if it's worth paying the ransoms. And fewer people are paying, in part because there's more and more laws against paying for these. In the US, depending on what country the attacker is in, if you pay the ransom, it might be considered aiding and abetting terrorism. So don't do that. And this is just a link to the report. If you just search for 2025 ransomware trends Veeam, it'll be the first result, but we are going to send all these slides so you can see it later as well. Intra ID backup is a new product, newish product from Veeam. They announced it last year. It came out sometime late last year. But this actually backs up the users, groups, and everything in Office 365. Intra ID used to be called Azure AD. This is just Microsoft rebranding, of course. But Microsoft doesn't back this up at all. So if you've ever managed Active Directory in any way, you know it's very easy to accidentally drag a user into the wrong OU, delete a user, put somebody in a group they're not supposed to be in, make a change, and not be able to figure that out. And it's very difficult to identify all that afterwards. And since Microsoft has no backups for it, you might not have a way back if you actually do something like that. And then malicious actors almost always make accounts in Intra ID. So when they're trying to get in, they'll make an innocuous looking user account that they make an administrator so that it doesn't like pop out in the logs or anything, but that's usually how they'll get around the environment. There's a couple different ways you can get this, either through Veeam Data Cloud, which is their cloud service where you don't have to have a server or anything, or just in normal Veeam Data Platform. It is actually part of VBR. You can back up all the normal stuff you would expect, users, groups, admin units. Admin units are basically OUs in Intra ID. Roles, apps. What's really cool though is you can back up conditional access policies, Intune policies, and audit logs. So those things normally only have conditional access policies are live. So if you screw one of those up, it's just messed up. Same with Intune policies, but audit logs in Intra ID are only kept for 30 days, unless you pay a lot of money for extra Microsoft services to basically get a SIM up there. With Intra ID, it's built to where it backs those up and you can restore those and get your logs for as long as you want. So if you want to keep a year's worth of logs, you can just back them up and have them as a searchable log that you can use for everything.
Cool. So as VMware has been raising prices to where no one wants to keep them anymore across the board, we've had a lot of inquiries around migrating away from VMware to Hyper-V. Given that Veeam is largely agnostic to hypervisors, this is a great tool to be able to help migrate away from VMware. And whether you're going to Hyper-V, Proxmox, one of the cloud providers, or any of the other big names, Veeam's a great tool to be able to help do that, right? So we can restore from one hypervisor to another. Now, we can't replicate like you would in a DR scenario where you have another image of it directly ready and you just turn it on. But what we can do is we can do a backup and restore to those other providers. Now, with Veeam's new instant on technology, the one thing we can do is an instant on. So we can take a backup from one platform, do an instant on to another platform, and then move that data over behind the scenes. This speeds up pretty dramatically your cutover time when doing that backup and restore failover. So it's been great. We've used that quite a few times across a number of different clients already, and it's been a good tool for that. Version 13 has new universal CDP drivers. Veeam's really been pushing into the CDP world to try and do faster replication, right? So this doesn't use normal snapshot-based data backup. It's a continuous data protection. So it injects a driver into the hypervisor itself to be able to reduce those RPOs down to minutes instead of whenever your snapshot runs on a nightly basis, etc. One of the next things Veeam put out is their new hardened repository ISO. If you haven't used the hardened repository before, what this is it is a ISO that you can install across any server that you have, any storage server that you have. It installs Linux on this, and then it creates a hardened repo. So this is not S3 storage by any means, but it is a minimal Linux footprint that you can use for a backup location. So the new version of this simplifies this install. If you've done the old install, you know that there's quite a few different steps that you have to do. You're still taking care of the Linux appliance itself with updates and user accounts, getting SSH set up. If you want MFA, that's a whole nother workaround that you have to do. So what Veeam's done is they've streamlined this process. So the install works quick, fast, easy. Once we get into 13, you'll notice there's a lot of similarities on that install. MFA is mandatory when you set that up. MFA is over to your phone, so it's great for that. So this is another tier that you can use in your backup repositories to be able to help have more locations of secure storage. Now, one thing to note is it's not S3, like I said, right? So it can't do some of the 365 stuff, and it's not quite that S3 immutable. This is a hardened repository. This is also not under full Veeam support. This is still under experimental support. So what that means is if you have an issue with this, if you call Veeam to get support on it, they will help you, but it's more of like a best effort type support, right? So they're going to help you check all the normal things. They'll go over all the basics, but you get into that multi-hour, very technical type of issue, they're not going to help you out as much with that. With the new repository ISO that they have, though, in this appliance, they have some live boot options that you can do to be able to help work on it. I've done restores to that for people that have forgotten stuff, and it works really well. The other thing this doesn't have, like some of our third parties, like Object First has, is there is no validation of security, right? They did not send this out to a third party and say, hey, try and hack into this, make sure it's secure. None of that has gone on with this. This is their own ISO that they install to be able to use as a hardened repo.
Which takes us neatly into Veeam 13. And one of the first big things with Veeam 13 are Linux appliance options. So up until now, for the last 17 years with Veeam, you've installed a Windows server, you've done whatever you needed to that Windows server, then you've installed Veeam on top of that server, and you've managed it as a normal Windows box, except for not really, because it's special because it's running backups. With Veeam 13, Veeam is launching their own Linux appliance options. They're built on Rocky Linux. So that's basically a version of Red Hat, for lack of a better way of putting it. And what they've tried to do here is follow all the DISA STIG controls. So if you're not familiar, that's a industry security guideline. And there's about 452 controls in that DISA STIG process. They've got between upper 80s to 90% of all of those controls implemented. They were pretty clear that if they do that last 10%, essentially the appliance becomes not operable. And you've probably been through some type of compliance at some point in your life where you have to deal with that. And they're like, well, you need to secure this. Like, but then I can't use it if I turn that on. And they're like, yeah, but it says here you need to do that. So they've done a lot to try to make this a very secure appliance option. And they've greatly simplified the installation for it. So when you go through the installation, you basically just pick in the appliance little, it looks kind of like an ESXi installer. You tell it whether you want to install Veeam Backup and Replication or VeeamOn, and you give it some basic information, IPs, usernames, and we'll talk about the usernames a little later because it's really cool what they've done. And then it goes. And you wait a little while, and when it's done, you've got a Veeam server installed that you can connect with the Veeam console, or you can connect to a web UI, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. There's a couple other versions of the ISO. One is made for the hardened repo, kind of like Dustin was talking about, where you can set it up just for the hardened repo. It's a very small, they call it just enough OS. Still Rocky Linux, but it's, I think, a quarter the size of this main Rocky Linux that they run. And it basically spits out a hardened repo right from the jump just by going through the installer. And there's also a live CD. So if you ever do actually have an issue with the appliance itself, you can boot off that and work on it. There are loads of major changes with 13. So I mentioned, of course, the new Linux appliances. Well, with that, they've done some console refreshes. So the main console UI, like you install the actual Veeam console itself on a Windows box, the UI is getting refreshed. This is largely a look and feel type thing. They're trying to keep things where they've been because, again, we have years of experience of, oh, that's under the advanced when you select VMs, things like that. They're not moving a lot around in this. It's more just making it look a little modern, newer, so on and so forth. They're also launching a web UI. So this is going to be HTML. You can just connect to it from any browser and manage your Veeam server. Much like when VMware went through this process, it's going to be limited at first. They're going to focus on those core things that people do all the time, like running a job, stopping a job, editing a job to add extra VMs to it, things like that. That's going to be the original functionality. And then as they move forward, they're going to add more and more stuff to it as they get the development cycles, essentially. If you don't want a web-based UI, you can disable it and stick with the console UI. If you consider that a security concern or something like that, you can disable this. Another thing with 13 is HA clustered Veeam backup repositories. So this is pretty much an enterprise type play, but if you've got your actual Veeam repositories on a completely separate server, but you have two Veeams, you have a Veeam server that backs up to it, you could actually cluster the Veeam backup server so that if one dies, all your jobs keep running once you fail over to the other one, and you don't have to like restore that one from backup, for example. This is only going to be on Linux. If you've ever done clustering in Windows, you know why. But this is going to be Linux only. It is going to be a manual failover. So essentially, if one of your boxes dies, you click a button and it fails over to the other one. It's not active and always on and stuff like that. It is active passive, but it makes it very easy to restore or flip over if you need to. We also are getting instant cloud recovery. So this is where Veeam's 18 million different ways you can recover get confusing. So Veeam has instant on. You've probably used that to bring a VM up in VMware or Azure on premise in just a minute or two. It's really cool. Veeam also has Veeam Cloud Recovery, where it can restore that VM to Azure or to AWS. The problem is when you go to restore that VM to Azure or AWS, there's a long spin up period. Veeam has to build a virtual appliance in Azure to actually proxy the data to do the restore. Veeam has to start that restore process, build the VM up there, everything. It takes a while to actually do a Veeam restore straight to Azure. It's cool that you have the option, but it's not that fast. Veeam Instant Cloud Recovery, essentially you can get a VM functional in Azure in less than 5 minutes. They did demo this at the event. Whether your storage is on-prem or in the cloud already obviously changes how well that restore goes. In this example, they had their storage, their secondary copy was going to Azure, and they were able to do an instant cloud recovery, and it came up in less than 5 minutes. So from server dying on-prem to being running in Azure in less than 5 minutes was pretty cool to see. As Dustin mentioned earlier, Veeam's also launching universal CDP agents. So these are agent-based. So instead of being stuck with the former thing where it has to be on VMware, it has to be these particular versions, and I've got to load it into the kernel ahead of time and have all that. The CDP agent driver loads straight into the guest. So I can have one Windows server that I want to do CDP on, and I can load that into that guest and do CDP to another location. It's agent-based, I say, because it's essentially installing in the OS, but it is just a driver. It works on Linux and on Windows, and you can basically do the normal stuff you can do with CDP. You can set an RPO, you can set short and long-term retentions, and have it go. So Veeam is specifically targeting this as a driver in the OS so that they can lower those recovery points when crossing hypervisors. So this is supposed to be improving the data portability side of it, where this is truly going to let you migrate from VMware to Hyper-V with almost no downtime, from VMware to eventually Proxmox and everything else with almost no downtime, because it's running in the VM. So it's basically pulling the data from the VM and then injecting it into the other hypervisor to build your server. So for migrations or just DR, could be a really great solution.
Cool. So Veeam 13 is pushing out a lot of security changes in this revision. As the new VBR server is going to be a full Linux appliance, you no longer have the ability to run normal Windows updates as you would before. And because this is a semi-hardened repository, you're going to need to do updates to it. So these updates are going to come from Veeam. They are going to be signed updates only, right? But what this does mean is through that Veeam console, you can update the entire system itself. No longer do you have to do Windows updates independently and then do your Veeam patches on top of it, and keep those out of sync and make sure those are updated. It's all through one UI console. So that's going to make updating your appliance and all the proxies much easier. This should give you one pane of glass to be able to update your appliance, update all the proxies, update all your repos. It's going to speed up that process quite a bit. These updates can be postponed, right? You don't want those running while your jobs are running. You might have some maintenance windows that you need to set up, so you can postpone those, but you can't ignore them permanently, right? Many times we've gone into Veeam servers that have been up for years and they don't have any Windows patches, they don't have any Veeam updates. These will be pushed out to your system, so you can postpone them but not ignore them completely. That deadline is going to be set during the initial setup, so you can go through that and see how long you have to update that during that setup. So when you install this new appliance, it's going to have a default repository on the server that you set it up with, right? So any extra space on that server will set up as the default repository. So that should help kind of get you going. And depending on if you're going to use this, when you set up the appliance, if you're going to use that appliance as a repo, or if that's just going to be your host and you have a repo offsite or at another location or just a different physical host, that default repository will be there. As I said, all the updates are going to be signed updates. So the issue you run into there is if you have any drivers or anything you need to install in the system that's not signed, will not be allowed by the system. You don't have any access into the kernel level to install anything else. That shouldn't be a problem for anything that comes from, Dell, HP, Supermicro, just any custom one-off white boxes that you might have. From all the testing, they've not found anything that didn't work yet, so it'd be interesting to see. And if you're going to clone a repository, you can do that over, but it must be a full clone. You can't do a partial clone of just a partial repository, so you got to have the whole thing in there when you run through that. Threat Hunter has been enhanced in version 13. Threat Hunter was released, I believe, in 12.1. And what this is it is Veeam trying to get ahead of the security game, right? So what we're trying to do is really enhance ransomware protection, malware protection, and how we're doing that is by tracking multiple different points of this, right? So if you turn on guest file indexing, what that does is it indexes all the files on your system, right? So it can really help with restores if you're looking for file names and such. But what that also does is it allows Veeam to track all the different pieces of software on your servers, right? So they'll do things like tracking You use Screen Connect on everything, but you don't track. You don't generally use TeamViewer, and now TeamViewer is installed. So that is a great indication of compromise. Like, hey, this is a new remote access software that's not usually on the system. So that's an indication of compromise. So they can fire off alerts based on that, right? So that's a great tool for that. They'll use their inline analysis to also search for onion links or ransomware notes, any encryption that's on the device. So while if you have ransomware running wild through your system, you're going to know that pretty quick. What this will help is pick up any systems that get ransomware one-off. And it'll also help determine when you're doing restores in your system after a ransomware event, what restore points are good that you want to be able to restore from, right? No point in restoring something that's been partially ransomwared, fully ransomwared. So this will help dramatically reduce that time. They also have new integrations for CrowdStrike, right? So now they can send all their logs off to CrowdStrike's LogScale platform and their Falcon platforms. This should help quite a bit if CrowdStrike detects that ransomware through the guest file indexing with Veeam. They can help speed things up if you miss an agent on that. If you're trying to pull logs from the servers, all this log injection gets sent straight over to CrowdStrike to be able to help. The Threat Hunter and up does require the advanced platform, right? We can't use Foundation on this, so it requires advanced or up. So it's not the freebie. You got to have the middle tier to be able to get this. But they did open up their security analytics API. So if you want to pull your own request through their API, if you want to write queries against it, you can do that now. Much faster than their old PowerShell queries that you used to have to run, and it can integrate with other third-party tools quite a bit. With the Threat Hunter feature, they also have hash detection. They can integrate with your third-party AV. So if you're doing restores on that, you can tell it what antivirus you have, and it can run detections against your backups. So you can run antivirus detection on your backups as you're doing restores. So even if the software was installed on your PC and it wasn't ransomware, or on your server and it wasn't ransomware, during that restore, we can check that server as we're going through it and restoring to make sure it's not there and it's going to be compromised as soon as you finish the restore, right? So that'll help out quite a bit.
Keeping with the security, but slightly adjacent, is authentication changes. So when you're setting up your new appliances, MFA is required. Full stop. It is not skippable. You have to turn it on for the administrator. It is time-based MFA, so it doesn't rely on the internet. It doesn't rely on a third party for that. And there are two accounts set up by default. One is called the administrator and one is a security officer. You can technically skip MFA for the security officer, but you cannot skip it for the administrator. So what happens is when you're in that UI that really does look like ESXi's, that text UI, as they're called, you go through, you set all your IPs, then you get to the authentication side, you put in the password for the administrator, and when you hit next, it pops up a full screen QR code that you can scan straight into Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, your authenticator du jour. Or it does have a little code at the bottom where if you're using a centralized password manager for your team, such as an IT Glue or 1Password, something like that, you can also put it in there. So that you can set up MFA from the beginning, absolutely required, and have that authentication secured from the beginning. If you've worked with Veeam for a long time, you know they added with 12.2, I think it was, MFA for the console, but it was only MFA for the console. You didn't get MFA for the actual server itself. So it essentially meant someone couldn't open the console without MFA, but they could just log into the Windows server and format it, which wasn't great for overall security. But now MFA is going to be on from the beginning, and it's going to be for all authentication to the box. So that's really nice. The security officer is a term that most people probably aren't familiar with in this case. That is for 4 eyes authorization. So if you want to do any major changes to the Veeam server, like say I want to delete a repo or delete a bunch of jobs or remove proxies or do major things like that, when I, as the administrator, go to do that, it's then going to send a request to the security officer that, hey, someone's trying to make major changes in the environment. You should go check these out and approve them if they're valid. So essentially, it's something else to keep the malicious actors from being able to, oh, we got the admin account, we're just going to go in and delete everything. In this case, when they went in to actually do that, it would trigger the security officer, and then someone else would have to be like, oh, hey, why is Jeff trying to delete all our backups? I don't like the sound of this. I'm going to call him and check before I click OK on this. With that, they're also getting role-based access control. Veeam's had a little bit of access control before, but it's always been not great. Plus, since it was on Windows, if you were an administrator in Windows, which was required for a lot of the Veeam stuff, you basically had access to everything anyway. But now they're implementing true RBAC control for everything. So you can actually delegate like, oh, this is an intern. I don't want them to be able to do anything at all but look to see if the job succeeded or failed. They can't actually rerun them. They can't do anything, but they can look and then let us know and we can change stuff. The appliance by default has no SSH access. Kind of like ESXi, if you have that emergency situation where for some reason you have to, there is a way of turning it on. You have to go to the actual console of the server to do it. It's not something that's easy to turn on, but you can get there. Then there's no root account. So this is a trick Linux does. I don't even know how you make a functional server, but it is a valid thing you can do. There is no root account on the box. And it's not there's no root account, but Veeam has the password for it. So if you call up support, they can get you in with root. There is not a root account. So when this is set up truly, if you brick yourself out of your administrator or your security officer account, you can't get in anymore. So you got to make sure those are actually valid and set up properly. And there isn't all the normal ways that you bypass all of those in Linux. There's also something called lockdown mode. So again, similar to what VMware did, it's almost like they're kind of following that path, at least technically. Let's not go further than that. Lockdown mode basically means that once you turn it on, no infrastructure changes can happen. So I get my Veeam server set up, I get my repository set up, I get all my proxies made, everything's the way I want it, everything's working well. If I turn on lockdown mode at that point, I can't make changes to the repos. I can't change the immutability period for a repo. I can't delete a repo. I can't do any of that stuff. I can add extra VMs to backup jobs. I can add extra jobs. I can add extra agents. I can do those types of things. But anything that could be a malicious action that would be disrupting the entire environment, I can't do when I'm in lockdown mode. So your example might be you get everything set up. It's the way you want it to be. You enable lockdown mode. And anytime you actually need to make those changes in the future, you say, I want lockdown mode off. It then sends something over to your security officer, whoever you've dictated. They have to approve it. Once they approve it, then you can turn it off and actually make changes to the infrastructure components. So when will we get it? This is soon. The appliance installs are coming Q3 2025. So that's that's some time in the quarter that starts less than 2 months away. This will be for new installs only. This is basically a way for them to validate everything works as they expect, everything's functioning the way they want, without the risk of people destroying all their production data during a migration. So this will be for net new installs only. So if somebody buys and wants to set it up, they can. If somebody wants to build a new Veeam environment in their ecosystem and start new backups and everything, that's also an option. Or you could technically move your data off your old repo to your new one and move everything over and test it. But you won't be able to do an in-place upgrade in Q3 25. At some point during Q4 2025, there's going to be another release for V13 on Windows. So this will allow you to upgrade your existing Veeam installs to version 13. This will do all of the normal migration stuff that we do. You hit next a few times in the ISO, and then you wait for, I don't know, an hour for it to do all its stuff, and now you're on 13. This will not include migrating to the new appliances. That comes in 2026. It was hinted that it's probably going to be early 2026, like Q1 to 2, but they would not be solid on when this was going to be. Because as you know, if you've ever tried to do any of these major migrations, like if you were around when you migrated from vCenter on Windows to vCenter in the appliance, it's not easy to pick everything up and drop it in a completely different operating system environment. Not to mention that if you've still not migrated off SQL onto Postgres, you're going to have to do it at this point because the Linux appliances run on Postgres. They don't run on SQL anymore. So that's coming sometime next year. So that's kind of your stepping through. If you upgrade to 13 on Windows, you obviously don't get the hardened server aspect of it because that's the Linux appliances, but you still get all the other new features, the new UI, the web UI, those other things that are coming with it. You just don't get the appliances. Veeam has a couple websites that talk about all this. So v.am/v13rec. This is basically what the requirements are going to be for 13. And when they say requirements, it basically means like we are definitely dropping support for ESXi 5.5.6, whatever. We're dropping support for Windows Server 2012 as your hypervisor, things like that. That stuff is going to be covered in this. Right now, these take you to some pretty unofficial looking sites. It's actually the Veeam forums post by GhostDev, I believe is what both of these are, but they will be trued up and made more proper closer to time. V13 prep basically talks about what all you would need to do to get ready for it. If anything's been deprecated, Veeam's been saying for 8-10 years now that reverse incremental backups are going away. 13, they finally go away for realsies, and you cannot do it anymore. So like the V13 prep would tell you things like, these features have been deprecated for a long time. Now these features are gone. So that's kind of the difference between those two. They'll update them throughout time, and then they will be legit once we get to the final version of it. We tried to go through this reasonably high level and quickly, so we do have some extra time. I will say real quick, we have another webinar coming up soon for compliance. So navigating compliance, everybody's getting compliance of some type now, be it CMMC, be it all the different governmental things, be it just things for HIPAA, for other things. This is kind of going to talk about how you make it through all that stuff. If you're interested, you can scan this QR code to sign up for it. But otherwise, we're going to open up the floor for any questions. There were a couple questions asked in the comments that have already been answered by Dustin. One of them was about the Linux appliance. There's going to be two versions of the appliance. One is the full VBR server, and the other version is a small one that can be used either for a repo or a proxy or different things like that. So if you just need those, you can use the smaller appliance for those. There's also still the ability to do a guest interaction proxy, which would need to be on Windows if you're backing up Windows boxes and want to do VSS, because you actually need to talk Windows to Windows to kick off VSS. But you could have the full proxy be virtual appliances. You could have 30 of those out there and then one guest interaction somewhere that just kicks off the VSS in Windows, or pre-thaw, post-thaw scripts for Linux and runs that way. And then there was also a question about Veeam 13 MFA. So it does use a QR code for third-party things. So you basically can put that in anything you want. There's also some SAML stuff going on with it as well. So if you have a full functional Okta type single sign-on, you can also integrate with that. Though is recommended to kind of keep your MFA or your authentication for Veeam separate, because you don't want a malicious actor to be able to compromise one source that's both your production and your backup and everything else. Any other questions from anyone?
Thanks, Brent. I'll give everyone a couple minutes to formulate any last minute questions. As you guys may be thinking through those, just want to say thank you to Brent and Dustin for covering these great insights from Veeam, especially version 13. Lots of important updates coming. Also wanted to mention their recap videos on Veeam's website from some of the keynote addresses. So if you want to watch partial conversations from those will be available. And this video will also be uploaded to YouTube as well. So if you feel like someone else should hear about these updates, learn about some of these insights, feel free to share this video with them as well, and we would be happy to talk with them. So before we jump off, we'll give a few more minutes for any last-minute questions.
If you go watch the videos on their site, the first keynote was boring, wouldn't recommend it. The second keynote is actually where they do a bunch of live demos. So I would skip to that.
So Brett, we actually do have a question from Keith. Did they talk about Scale HCI?
So as far as a hypervisor, no, there wasn't anything about Scale HCI. They're walking through all the KVM derivatives as far as support. So at some point they might hit Scale HCI. There's actually a post in the Veeam forums where the president owner of Scale HCI was pushing them to support it. And GhostDev was like, it's such a tiny market share that they occupy right now that they weren't interested in it at this time. But it does just run on KVM the same way Proxmox and Red Hat and all the other ones do. So presumably they would be able to support it at some point.
Great. Well, Keith, thank you for the question. Jeff, thank you for your question. Kyle, also your question. Really exciting discussion today. Again, this will be uploaded to YouTube for those that want to watch it or share it as well after the fact. Before we close, just wanted to mention here at Mirazon, we're experts in working with Veeam, and we love partnering with them. If you do have any questions after this webinar or something you want to dive into more details with, please reach out to us. You can do that by sending us an email at info@mirazon.com. We'd be happy to talk with you and address those questions. As Brent mentioned, we have a webinar coming up, and we're very excited about that. It's going to be diving into compliance, so feel free to attend that on the 28th. And our Director of Managed Services, Jordan, will be leading that discussion. With that, thank you guys for attending today's recap webinar on VeeamOn, and we look forward to talking with you on future webinars. Thank you guys so much.